What's up everyone, welcome back. Now that we've been able to create our user authentication model, let us build on top of that so that users can create user accounts within our applications. Now using these accounts, they'll be able to perform various actions within our application, as we shall see later on in the series. So to begin, we're going to go ahead and first of all create the routes that are responsible for our authentication. In one of the videos, which is the video where I talked about routers, we described how routers can help us to organize routes that are related together so that they are all accessed via a single router. Now we're going to create one for authentication. So to begin, I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call routers.py. And inside there, I'm going to begin by creating the auth router. So shall import the API router class. If you haven't checked this video out, I'll leave it at the top. So I'll say from FastAPI, we are going to go ahead and import our API router class. Once we've imported that, we shall go ahead and create our auth router. And once we've imported our auth router, the next thing is going to be to create an instance of our auth router. So once we've been able to create our auth router instance, now let's go ahead and create the endpoint for creating our users or signing them up. So that will be created by using the auth router. Now remember, all HTTP methods can be accessed on this auth router, so shall say auth router.post, and then you want this to be accessed on the /signup endpoint or the /signup route. So I'll just say /signup. And once that has been done, now let's go ahead and define the function that's going to handle this request. So shall say async def, and this is going to be create user account. Now, since we have been able to create the route handler function, now let's go ahead and define the structure of the data that's needed to create a user. So if we go back to our models.py right here, we define the fields that are required for a user account. However, if you're to notice, there's one important field that we forgot, and that is the password hash field. In this series of videos, we're going to be making use of passwords to allow users access our application, so we need to add that. Now, lucky for us, we set up Alembic, which makes it easy for us to run these migrations. So I'll begin by going right here and adding a field. So I'm going to call this the password hash field. It's going to be a string, and we shall basically not serialize it when returning responses. So this means we're going to exclude it, and by doing so we shall use the field function, and within the field function we're going to provide an argument, which is going to be the exclude argument. Now this exclude argument is a boolean that specifies whether a field should be serialized using this model. Now by serialization we mean when we are returning this in JSON, or when we are trying to convert it into a data type from this Python class or this Python object, then rather than displaying it, we shall hide it so that we do not expose this password hash. Now we're going to set this to false, or actually exclude is going to be true, since we do not want it to be part of our fields. Now once this is done, let's go ahead and apply this to our database. I'm going to pull up my terminal right here, and I'll clear it with Ctrl and L. And the next thing I'm going to do is to say Alembic. So this is going to be Alembic, and in this case we shall create a new revision. Now this is going to also be auto-generated, so we shall specify auto-generate, and in this case we shall call this we shall provide that message as add password hash, or add password field, or whatever you want to call it. So this will go ahead and create the migration within our database, and to apply this migration, then the next thing we're going to do is to say Alembic, and in this case we shall go ahead and finish this with Alembic upgrade and then head. So this is going to take that newly created migration and then add it to our database. So if we go back to our migrations folder, we can notice that the operations that are happening within our Alembic. So the first thing we shall notice is we're going to add to our users table a column named password hash, and this is going to be its type. So it shall be a simple string, just like we see right here, and it's not going to be nullable. So Alembic is going to automatically generate that for us. And in case we wanted to undo this, we can just run an Alembic downgrade, and then that will go ahead and run the downgrade function to help us undo the creation of the password hash field. Now if we check within our Postgres, we can now confirm that that password hash field has been created and is not now. So let's go ahead and create the route for creating our users. Now to create our users, just like I said, our route has been created right here. So we need a structure of the data that's going to be used to create a user. So I'm going to head over back to our source folder within our auth directory. I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call schemas.py. Now, in any front-end application, you're going to have forms, and these schemas are kind of what you may have as forms on your backend. Why? Because they're going to allow you to be able to pick data from a client and then validate that data before it's actually sent to the server. So by creating this schema or this pydantic model, what we are doing is to create a class or a form, think of it as a form, where our data is going to be sent by any client to our API, and then it's going to validate that data, check whether any validation errors are present. So to begin, we're going to import our pydantic model, our pydantic base model class. So shall say from pydantic, we are going to go ahead and import base model. And once we've imported base model, now let's create our class for creating a new user. So we're going to create a class, and this class is going to be called the user create model. So this is going to also be a subclass of the base model class, and it's going to have fields for creating a user. So we're going to start adding those. So shall say user, and our user is going to be a string. So in this case, we can actually have this as our username. Sorry for this. So this is going to be our username, and then we can have our email, which is going to be a string, and then you can also provide our password, which shall be a string. Now, in case you want to carry out validations for, let's say, the max length or the min length of a field, then that's where our field function is going to be so important. So we're going to go ahead and import that, and then we shall use it with our username. So we shall say that our username is going to be a field, but this is going to have, let's say, a max length of, so this is going to be a max length of, let's say, 8 characters. So the username is going to be maximum 8 characters. And then our email is going to be a field, but let's say this is going to be a max length of, this is going to be, let's say, 40 characters. And then for our password, we are going to just say this is going to be a field, and we shall set min length in this case. So our min length is going to be, let's say, 6 characters. So minimum password we shall require is going to be 6 characters. And once this has been created, now let's go ahead and use this within our route or within our path handler. So I'll go back to routes.py, which I've actually called routers. So let me go ahead and rename this to routes. And what I'm going to do is to go ahead and provide that within our path handler function. So I have to go ahead and import that. I'll say from, and in this case, we're going to have our source, or this is actually in the same folder. So I can import it via .schemas, and then we can import our user create model. Once we've imported our user create model, let's go ahead and provide it here. So I'm just simply going to call this the user data. So it will be our user create model. So once we've done this, now let's go ahead and define a service file similar to what we did when creating our books or when carrying out CRUD for our books. So inside that service file is where we're going to have the logic that's responsible for doing anything CRUD on the user side. So I'm just going to come and create that file. I'll call it service.py. And within service.py, I'm first of all going to import the model. So I'll say from .models, we are going to go ahead and import our user model. And once we've been able to do that, now let's also go ahead and import our async session class, since the session is going to be an instance of the async session. So shall say from SQL model, .ext.asyncio.session, we shall import our async session class. And once that is done, now let's go ahead and create our service class. So we're going to create a class, and this class is going to be our user service, or you can call it auth service or whatever you want to name it, but I'll simply keep it to user service. And this is going to, of course, have the different methods that we shall use when creating a user, reading up a user, updating a user, and deleting a user. But that's not the point of this video. What we want is to go ahead and do two things. We're going to check whether a user exists within our database, and then if they exist, we throw an error. If they don't exist, then we are going to go ahead and create their user account. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to define a method, and I'm going to call this async def. So this is going to be check user, or we can call it get user. Let's actually create one to get the user account. So we can have a field. So let's just say we're going to use their email for checking whether they exist. Now, this is also going to make use of our session, so do not forget to provide that. And our session is going to be of type async session. Now, what we want to do is to go ahead and query our database to check whether a user exists, or to check for the user who has that specific email. So we're going to need to create a statement. If you haven't watched this, please go and watch the CRUD where we did for the CRUD for the books. So in SQL model, we shall first of all create a statement, and then this is going to be a select statement to get the user from our database. So we're going to go at the top right here and import select from SQL model. So we shall say from SQL model import select. And once that is done, we're going to go ahead and make use of our select with our user model. So this is select user. Then we're going to select the user with the email, which is our email right here. So we shall say user dot email is equal to what we have as our email. So it's going to be our email. And for us to access the first, or the first object with this specific email, we shall have to create a result object, which is going to be a result of using our session. So we shall say await session dot, in this case, we shall execute this statement. And right after executing this statement, the next thing is going to be for us to return the result, or return the object. So our book is going to be that specific object. So in this case, we shall say return book, which our book is going to actually be the result of calling the first method on our result object. So we shall say that our result, or our book, is going to be result.first. And by doing that, we shall get access to the first object that has that specific email. So the process is to create a statement, create a result after executing the statement, and then use any of the methods on that object to get what you want. So that's what we have done right here. So this is going to get the user by email. Let's actually modify this to get user by email so that we are a little bit clear. So this is going to be get user by email. And now right after getting the user by email, we're going to also create another method, which is going to be called user exists. So in this case, we are also going to provide our email as well as our session. Now this is going to also be of type async session. And once we've been able to do that, now let's go ahead and make use of this method we've used right here. So we're going to say we have actually called this book, but this is going to be user. So I'm sorry for this. I'm really sorry for this confusion. So what we are trying to do here is to first of all get the user object. And once we've got the user object, we're now going to return true or false for whether that user exists. So in this case, we shall say that our user is going to be self, which is actually await, because the method is with async, so it's a coroutine. We have to call it with await. So I'll say await self. In this case, we shall say self dot get user by email. And what we shall have here is going to be, so one thing I'm forgetting is the self, so I'll also have to provide it since we want to call this on the objects of this user class. So if we want to access this method right here, we shall have to provide self, which is going to allow us to get the method. So in this case, if we say self.getUser by email, then we shall have to provide the email, which is going to be our email as well as our session. And once we've been able to do that, now let's go ahead and check whether the user exists. So in this case, we shall say if user is none. In this case, we shall go ahead and return true, actually false, because the user doesn't exist. So this is going to return false. And then if they don't, in case they are not none, then we are going to simply return true. So in this case, we shall return true. And once that is done, then one thing we can do is to go ahead and change this to use something like a ternary operator. So the way we can do this is by changing this statement to say return true if user is not none, else false. And that will just be the equivalent of the if statement we had written. So this will return true if our user is not none, else it will return false. And that is just a simple syntactical sugar right there. So so far created two methods. One to get our user by email. The second one is to check if our user exists, and that uses our get user by email. Thirdly, what we're going to do is to use the data that comes from our client to create our user. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'll say async def, and in this case we shall say create. So let's actually just say create user. So this will be our create user method. It will take in self, to take in the credentials of the user or the information that comes from the client. So let's say the user data. And once we've been able to create that user data or get that user data, let's go ahead and modify it to make it of a type that is similar to the schema that we have created right here. So we shall have to import that. I'll just come at the top right here and say from .schemas. In this case, we are going to go ahead and import our user create model. So once that is done, we shall go ahead and provide the type hint. And this is going to be of our user create model. And then we shall provide our session. And our session is going to be of type async session. Now, once this is done, let's go ahead and create our user. So to create our user, we are going to go ahead and get the data that's coming from our client. And let's convert it to a dictionary. So I'm just going to say user data dictionary is going to be equal to the user data, because this is now an object of type user create model. But then we can convert it to our dictionaries by calling the model dump function or the model dump method. And once that is done, we are going to create a new user object. So we shall say new user, and our new user is going to be equal to a new user. So let's go ahead and create a new user object. And then we shall just unpack whatever we've got from our user data. So that is going to be it. But one thing that we also need to note is that our password is going to be hashed. So for us to hash our password, we're going to need to use passlib. So passlib is this library that is necessary for us to go ahead and hash our passwords. All we do is to get user passwords as strings, but store them in a very unreadable format in our database, which is just so easy to verify with. So when you store this hash in our database, we're going to require a string and then check or verify whether that string matches the hash that we have in the database. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we're going to do is to head over to our terminal and install passlib. So we shall say pip install passlib. And this will go ahead and collect passlib and add it to our virtual environment. Once that is done, we are now going to create a utils file. We're going to look into the methods that, or the functions that are going to help us to hash our password. I'm going to come right in here, and the first thing I'll do is to create a new file, and I'm going to call this our utils.py. So inside here is where we're going to create all utility functions that we shall use as far as authentication is concerned. So I'll begin by creating a crypt context object. Now what this is simply a way for us to define the algorithms we're going to use to hash our passwords. So I'm going to say from passlib.context, we are going to go ahead and access the crypt context class. Now the next thing is going to be for us to create the context object. So we're simply going to say that our password context, so let's just call it our password context. Our password context is going to be an object of type crypt context, and in this case we shall have to specify the scheme. So we shall say that our schemes is going to be a list, and this list is going to be a list of the algorithms that we're going to use to hash our passwords, but in this case we're going to be using bcrypt. So I'll just go ahead and provide bcrypt in there, and then right after doing this, we are going to create the functions that are going to be necessary for us to create our password hashes, as well as to verify password strings of the hashes that we have stored in our database. Now let us go ahead and do that. I'll begin by defining a function. This is going to be called, well, let's just call it generate hash, or generate password hash. Now let me just say it's going to be generate password underscore hash, and this will take in a password, or a password string, and to go ahead and also return a string. So this is basically what we're going to need. So when we have a password, all we're going to do is simply generate an unreadable string of that password that is going to be stored within our database. So we're going to say that our hash is going to be a result of using our password context object to hash our string password. So I'll just say this is going to be our password. Once this has been done, now the next thing is going to be to just return our hash. Once we've returned our hash, now let's go ahead and simply go to verifying our password. So I'm going to create another function, and that is going to be one to verify our passwords. So we shall use this when logging in or when creating our JWTs, as we shall see. So this is going to take in the password, which is our secret, and then it will also take in the hash that is stored within our database. So we're going to have our password hash, and this also will be a string. So in this case, this shall return a boolean to tell us whether the password has matched or not. So in this case, we shall go ahead and say return. In this case, we shall use our password context object dot. In this case, we shall call a verify method, shall take in the secret, which is our password, and then the hash, which is going to be the password hash that we've stored in our database. Let me fix this. And once that is done, now let's go ahead and call this method to hash our password before we store it in our database. I'm simply going to go back right within our service, and then I'll say from dot, in this case, we are going to say from dot service, we shall import our, so this is going to be our generate password hash. This is not actually service, it's going to be from utils. We shall import our generate password hash. Once we import a generate password hash, now let's go ahead and make use of it when storing our password. So we can update the password hash by saying new user. So in this case, we shall say new user.password hash is going to be equal to generate password hash. And in this case, what we want to do is to access the user data dictionary, and then shall go ahead and get our password. So whatever we shall get as our password from the user data dictionary is going to be hashed, and then we shall use our session to go ahead and save our user. So let's do that. We shall say session dot add, and in this case we shall add our new user. After adding our new user, then we shall use this session to commit that to the database. So we shall say await session dot commit, and this will go ahead and finally commit the transaction to our database. So right after doing that, we shall now go ahead and return our newly created user. So we shall say return new user. And this is going to be just what we need to create our new user. So if you can look at this file, what we have done is to first of all create a method that's going to get our user by email. And we've also created a new method that's going to allow us to check if the user exists by using this same method. And right after doing that, then we are going to go ahead and create that user. So let's go ahead and make use of these methods. So I'm going to go back to our routes, and the first thing I'll do is to go ahead and extract our email. So I'll say that our email in this case is going to be equal to our user date. Oh, this is actually going to be our user data. So I'll change this to user data. And in case you want to access the email, we shall access it via .email. So let's go ahead and make use of our user service. So I'll go ahead and import it. I'll say from .service, we shall import our user service. Once that is done, now let's go ahead and create a new object of that. So I'll say that our user service object is going to be equal to our user service. And once we've created that object, now let's go ahead and make use of it. So we shall create a variable called user exists, and this is going to be equal to our user service object dot user exists. So this will take in the email as well as our session. Now one thing we haven't yet done is to inject our session object inside this router or this route handler function. So let's go ahead and import that dependency. So we shall import it from source.db.main. If you haven't checked out the introduction to dependency injection, please feel free to go ahead and watch that CRUD with SQL model video on this playlist. Now say from source.db.main, we shall import our get session dependency, and then the next thing is going to be for us to inject it within our path handler or within our route handler function. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll add a comma right here, and then I'll say that our session is going to be of type async session. So I'll just go ahead and import that. Let me just copy what I have here, and then I'll paste it right here. So this is going to be of type async session, and then we shall just inject this object within our route handler. So for us to inject a dependency within our handler, we shall make use of the depends function from FastAPI. And once this is done, then we're going to go ahead and say depends. And in this case, we shall have to provide the dependency, which is our get session object. Now, once we've got our session, let's make use of it. So in this case, we shall provide our email. And then right after providing our email, the next thing is going to be the session object, which we shall provide just like you see right here. Now, remember that this method right here is one that's going to return, which is actually a coroutine. So we have to await it. I'll say await user service.user exists. Now, once we've been able to do that, now this is going to return a boolean based on whether the user exists or not, just like you see right here. It checks whether the user exists and returns none. If it returns false if the user does not exist. So if we go back right here, we are going to now make use of this. So shall just say if user exists, then we are going to throw an exception. So let's go ahead and do that. We shall raise an HTTP exception. So let's go ahead and import that. We shall say from FastAPI.exceptions. In this case, we shall import our HTTP exception class. Once we've been able to import that, now let's go ahead and finish this by saying raise HTTP exception and in this case, it's going to raise the status code of, so in this case, we shall say, let's go ahead and import the status module from FastAPI. So shall just come right here on the top and say import status, and then let's make use of that right here by saying status dot http 403 forbidden. So shall also provide the detail, and let's say this is going to be detail is equal to user with email already exists. So in this case, we shall say user with email already exists. Now, when you go ahead and pass this line of code right here that returns true from the user existing, we're now going to return what is going to happen when creating a new user. So to do that, we are simply going to create our new user. We shall say our new user is going to be equal to a result of using our user service object to go ahead and create a user. Now remember, that is a coroutine, so we shall have to await it. We shall say user service dot create user, and in this case we shall provide our user creation data, which we have provided right here as our user data, and then we are going to go ahead and provide our session object, which is going to be our session. So once our user has been created, then the next thing is going to be for us to return a response. So to do that, we shall simply just come right here and say return our new user. Then we shall specify both the status code and the way to serialize this new user, because this is going to be a new user object. So for us to do that, we are going to go back right here where we created our path. So I'm just going to enter in here within our sign up route, and then I'll provide some other arguments. So after providing the sign up path, we are now going to also provide the response model. So our response model is going to be equal to our, so let's just make use of whatever we have on our model. So I'll just go ahead and get our model, or we can even modify or create a schema that will be responsible for returning all these fields as they exist on our user model. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just simply come and say class, and this is going to be our user model because it's going to return all the information of our user. So this is going to be our base model, and then we shall just go ahead and copy all the fields that exist within our model right here, except for the database specific stuff. Now just go ahead and provide it just like we see it right here. I'll copy what we have here, and then I'll go ahead and paste it right here. And one thing I'm going to do is to get rid of anything that has anything to do with our database. So I'll just remove this, and then I'll remove, so I'll just go ahead and remove these fields, or these extra information that links it to our database. So once that is done, then I'm simply also going to remove this default, and then the only field I'm going to not tamper with is going to be our password hash, because we want to exclude it when we are returning our response. So what I'm going to do is to import what is missing, and that is our UUID module as well as our datetime class. So I'll say from datetime we shall import our datetime. And once that is imported, then let's go ahead and make use of this user model. So inside our routes, I'm simply going to go ahead and import that. I'll say import user create model as well as our user model. And now I'll have to just provide it right here. So this is going to be our user model. So once that has been done, now let's finalize this by also returning a status code. So we shall say that our status code is going to be status dot http 201 created, which is the right status code for a newly created object. To finish this, let me format my code. I'm having the black VS Code extension, so it's going to format my code, and my code will look a little bit more spaced and organized. So right after doing this, let's go ahead and test this endpoint out. If I pull up my terminal, I'll run the server with sorry for this. This is going to be FastAPI dev, and then we shall point to the source folder. This will run our server. Then I'll go to our RESTbox right here, and I'll create a new request. So this request is going to be one for auth, and in here is where I'm going to provide all the authentication routes. Oh, this is a new request, so let me just create it as a folder. I'll create a new folder, and this new folder is going to be called auth, and the first endpoint or request we're going to create within our auth folder is going to be the create user account request. So I'm going to say this is going to be create user account. So this is going to be a post request, just like we've defined it in here, and then it's going to be on http / can say localhost 8000 / so the next thing we have to do before we go ahead is to register this router on our app, which we haven't yet done. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and then I'll head over to our danda init.py within our source folder, and then we are going to go ahead and register our router. So to begin, we have to import it. So I'll just come right here and say from source, sorry for this. So this is going to be from source.auth, sorry, from source.auth.routes, we shall go ahead and import our auth router. And once this is imported, then let's go ahead and register it. I'm going to copy what we have here and then paste it down here. So what is our book router? In this case, it's going to be our auth. So shall say auth, and then instead of having auths, we're going to have /auth, and then this is going to be our auth tag. And once this is done, hoping that our server is still running, we're now going to go ahead and create our first request on our authentication prefix. So I'll say API /version1 / in this case auth, and then /sign up. So when we send, we're going to see that our body is missing. So let's go ahead and provide it. We're going to come and say that it's going to be JSON, and if we try to submit fields that do not have our fields, they're going to be missing. So let's start with our test email. So I'll just say that our email is going to be our test mail at, let's say, company.com, and then our email, so our email has been provided. We're now going to provide our username. So our username is going to be our test user 123. Then to provide our password, I am going to go ahead and provide our test pass 123, and then when I send this, we're now going to see that this password should be a string with at most 8 characters. So we have 123, so this exits the number of characters, so our validation is working. So we now have to go ahead and provide a shorter password. So I'll say test 1234, and I think this password will now work. So if we go ahead and send, so see this is still 1234. So at most 8 characters. Should we provide less? Let me provide less. So I guess I have to change that so that we have our main length only. So I'll do that within our schemas. And then here we're going to have our password having. So I think that's something we did on the models. Is it on our models? I don't think that is. If we go back to our schemas right here, we have min length 6, max length. So our max length should be, oh, it's our username. That's, so I'm going to change that. So I'll say test user 1, which is actually also greater than 8 characters. So let me change that. Provide this. So we have an internal server error. Let's go ahead and fix that. So we now see that user argument, that must be a mapping, not user create model. So I think we made that mistake. If we go back to our service, we have Well, I went ahead and created the user by unpacking. So this should be our user data dictionary. So we are going to go ahead and set this up. And when we go back right here, we send this request, we still have an error. So this error is saying that, so our insertion is failing and we are being told that not null in the column first name or relation users violates not null constraint. So let's go ahead and also fix that. So that means we shall have to add that field to our user create model. So I'm going to add our first name as well as our last name because I think they're all not null. If you check within our database, we have not null for our first name and not null for our last name. Now these are going to be automatically added, so we don't have to worry about them. So I'm just simply going to come and provide them. So let's first do that within our schemas. So our user create model is also going to have those fields. So shall have our first name. So this shall be a string and this shall be field. We can also provide the max length to be 25 characters, and then we can also have the last name to be, so this is going to be field, and we can have also the max length to be 25 characters. Once that is done, now let's go ahead and try to add those to our client. Now I'm going to come right here and provide them. So I'll just come and say our first name is going to be equal to, so this is going to be our test, and then we shall have a last name. So this last name is going to be so let's call this test and then user. So we shall send, and now we see that our user has been created. So if we try to send this again, we are now going to see that our user has been created. So this user already exists and we are not allowed to create that user again. So we have pretty much created our user account. So let's create another user. We are going to call this Jen or John, and then we're also going to have this second name called Doe. Then we shall have the email being johndoe@company.com. Then you can have the username being jdoe123, and then the password. So if you send, we're now having this being returned. Now notice how our password hash is not being returned, and that is being done because we already set this exclude being to true, meaning that that field is not going to be returned when we are serializing the user object. So we have been successful in creating our user. In fact, if we try to create this user, we're now going to see that our user with email exists. So in this video, we've successfully been able to create user accounts using the database model or the user authentication model we created in the previous video. If you like this video, please leave a like. It's the way that you can support my video cheaply. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good day. Bye.